Good afternoon, this is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding, here to discuss the basics of offshore tax havens for individuals. Offshore tax haven doesn't mean you're doing anything illegal. If the idea of an offshore tax haven brings your mind back to those late 1990s, early 2000 movies, moving all your money and your life to the Caymans and the Bahamas and all that, it could be, but that's not necessarily what it is. Plenty of people go to offshore tax havens for tax avoidance, which is legal, versus tax evasion, which isn't. And then when it comes to offshore tax havens, it depends. Like, are you just giving up your U.S. citizenship or permanent residency and shooting over to a different country, or are you keeping your U.S. status and just taking a company, possibly inverting it overseas, something along those lines? Some countries are considered tax havens because there's very beneficial tax benefits to being set up in that country. Generally, it will depend on if the person is still a U.S. person or not, or whether it's a company. So one term that gets thrown around a lot when you're thinking about offshore tax havens for individuals. And sorry, let me jump in. One more thing here. For purposes of this little summary here, we're going to do individuals. So corporate will be a separate one. This is mainly for individuals. So when an individual is considering setting up in an offshore tax haven, giving up their U.S. status, hopefully, if they're going to do that, then one of the key phrases that comes up a lot is something called a golden visa. A golden visa is something that is used to describe various countries that allow you to move up the line and get permanent residency or citizenship, depending on the nature and type of the visa, by investing in the country. The U.S. has it too, so U.S. is known as one of the main tax havens offshore for people who don't live in the U.S., set up in Vegas or Wyoming. So with the golden visa, in the U.S. it's an EB-5, but basically what you do is you invest a bunch of money, you create jobs. It just depends. In Portugal, it used to be that right now it's potentially going to be modified, but people would invest money in an old home, about 300,000 euro, I believe, off the top of my head, and then you get certain permanent residency if you want it, and things like that. A lot of countries have it. Some of the common ones are Portugal, although they may make new investors move from coastal cities 50 miles inland, so it may not be as sexy as it used to be. Then for other golden visa programs, you've got Singapore, you've got Malta, you've got a few others. So one of the key components is to determine whether or not you want to do it for residency and citizenship, and if you're giving up your U.S. status. So if the goal is to move to an offshore tax haven to reduce your tax liability, and you're a U.S. person, one of the first important key components is to make sure you give up your U.S. status. If you're non-U.S. citizen, non-long-term resident, that may be relatively simple, an I-407, or just don't meet the substantial presence test, and that would be it. Otherwise, you've got to go through the expatriation, make sure you're not a covered expatriate. If you are, going through the exit tax and Form 8854, et cetera, et cetera. One more important thing if you're going to one of these offshore tax havens is to determine what your tax status would be in the U.S. So when you're in the U.S., you do a W-9, or when you're a U.S. person, W-9. If you're no longer a U.S. person, you're living in one of these havens, then if you're still going to have U.S. income, the goal would be to try to find income that is not sourced in the U.S. but sourced in the foreign country. Even if it's being generated in the U.S., there are various different types. It just depends. If your goal is to get to one of these offshore tax havens, but you're not in tax compliance, and you want to either expatriate or file selling papers if you're required to, 2063 or 1040C, not to be confused with 1040 Schedule C, you want to make sure you're in compliance. There's various programs available to help you do that. You don't want the tax consequences to follow you once you've left. There's a voluntary disclosure program, the streamlined procedures for now. They're talking about getting rid of those reasonable cause and delinquent FBAR. They already got rid of OVDP. They already got rid of the delinquent international information return submission procedures, which is basically used for any other form other than the FBAR. If you didn't have any other unreported income, you can normally skate by without a penalty. We have lots of resources available on our main website, goldinglawyers.com. You can always reach out and schedule a reduced fee initial consultation if you think it's appropriate. Again, my name is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.